Tonight on Scary Stories channel, you will hear 3 terrifying stories born from the shadows of the Second World War, abandoned hospitals, ruined castles, places where war didn't end. It mutated. These are not stories about battles or soldiers. These are stories about what was left behind and what learned to survive in silence. Turn down the lights, stay still, and listen carefully. This story will tell us about a building that was officially closed after World War II. A place where the war ended on paper, but not inside the walls. The ruins are located in Eastern Europe, less than 40 kilometers from a modern city. Officially, the building no longer exists. In post-war records, it is listed as cleared and dismantled in 1952. No further documentation, no photographs, no transfer of ownership. Locals still refer to it as the hospital, although later maps identify it as a castle. Both are incorrect. During the war, it was used as a military medical facility, not a field hospital, a long-term one. Patients were brought there when they were not expected to return to service or return at all. I became involved in the site during a historical preservation survey. My role was limited: verify the state of the ruins, confirm structural collapse, photograph remaining interiors. The access road had been reclaimed by forest. No signage, no fencing. That was the first inconsistency. Post-war demolitions were usually thorough. Dangerous structures were either flattened or sealed. This one had simply been left. The outer walls were still standing, stone, thick, older than the war itself. The main entrance had collapsed inward, but the arch remained intact. Above it, partially buried under moss, was a symbol I didn't recognize. Not military. Not religious. The air inside was colder than outside. Not damp, preserved. Sound behaved strangely. Footsteps did not echo properly. Noise seemed to stop a few meters from where it was made. I noted that in my recorder. The first rooms were empty, broken beds, rusted frames. Nothing unusual. Then I reached the central corridor. The floor tiles changed abruptly. White ceramic, cracked but intact, continuing far deeper into the structure than the exterior walls should have allowed. The corridor sloped downward. That should not have been possible. According to architectural records, the lower levels were sealed in 1947 due to structural instability. No records describe what was below. On the wall near the entrance to the corridor, someone had painted a warning. Not during the war. The paint was newer, no older than 20 years. It read, "Do not record." Namasi photographed it. My camera hesitated. Before saving the image. At the end of the corridor, I saw doors. Not collapsed. Closed. And behind one of them, something moved. The doors at the end of the corridor were numbered, painted directly onto the wood, not mounted plaques. The numbers were inconsistent. Some stenciled, some handwritten, some scratched in with a sharp object. Ward 1, Ward 2, Ward 4. There was no Ward 3. I tried the first door. Unlocked. It opened inward with almost no resistance, as if it had been used recently despite the rust on the hinges. The room beyond was not a patient ward. It was administrative. Desks lined the walls. Filing cabinets tipped over and emptied long ago. Papers scattered across the floor, yellowed but intact. No mold. No water damage. That alone was wrong. The roof above had partially collapsed decades ago. These documents should not have survived. I picked up the nearest file. It was a patient intake form. No name. No age. No unit designation. Only a handwritten note under condition. Non-responsive. Conscious. Every file in the room was the same. Different handwriting. Same wording. Dates ranged from late 1944 to mid-1948. 3 years after the war officially ended. I recorded that detail aloud. That's when I heard it. Not a voice. Breathing. Slow. Controlled. Coming from deeper down the corridor. I stepped back into the hall. The slope continued past the doors I could see, curving slightly, disappearing into darkness. Electrical conduit ran along the ceiling, newer than the stone, newer than the war. Someone had maintained this place. I moved toward Ward 2. Inside were beds, not hospital beds, frames bolted directly into the floor, leather restraints still attached, dry, cracked, untouched by decay. On the wall above each frame, there were markings. Tallies. Grouped carefully. Some stopped abruptly. Others went on far longer than space should have allowed, wrapping around corners. Continuing behind fixtures, I counted one set. It ended at 1,127. The breathing sound stopped. In the silence that followed, I became aware of another detail. The air moved. Not a draft, circulation. Like the building itself was still ventilating. At the far end of the ward, there was another door, smaller, reinforced. A sign hung crookedly from it, written in 3 languages. None of them used the word patients. All 3 used the same term, subjects. I did not open that door. Instead, I noticed the observation window set into it. Thick glass, reinforced. I wiped dust from it with my sleeve. The room on the other side was lit. Not brightly, not fully, just enough to see shapes. Beds. Occupied. They did not move, but something inside the room reacted to my presence. I could feel it before I saw it. A hand pressed slowly against the glass from the other side, not clawing, not panicked. Deliberate. As if confirming that someone was still watching, I stepped back. That was when the corridor lights turned on. Not all at once, one by one, leading deeper, underground. The lights stopped turning on after the 7th fixture. Beyond that point, the corridor was illuminated only by a dull, permanent glow coming from somewhere below. Not flickering, not electrical in the way I recognized. I should have left. Instead, I followed the light. The walls changed again. Stone gave way to poured concrete. The craftsmanship was crude, rushed, post-war. This section had been added after the original structure was meant to be abandoned. That detail alone contradicted every official record. At the next junction, the corridor widened into what had once been a command room. Maps covered the walls. Not battle maps. Diagrams of the building itself. Layer after layer of additions, all descending. Levels that did not appear on any municipal archive. Entire wings marked with dates after 1945 and stamped repeatedly in red ink. Authorized for CONTINUAN. On a central table lay a metal box, military issue. No insignia. Inside were reels of magnetic tape and a logbook wrapped in OILCLOTH. I opened the logbook. The first entry was dated May 12, 1945. 3 days after the war's end in this region. Evacuation incomplete. Subjects remained stable. Continuation approved under Article 9. There was no Article 9 in any treaty I knew. Page after page detailed procedures. Not treatments. Observations. Sleep deprivation. Sensory isolation. Sensory isolation. Not treatments. Observations. Sleep deprivations. Sensory isolation. Ain't in any treaty I knew. Page after page detailed procedures. Not treat. Prolonged exposure to silence. The notes were disturbingly neutral. No mention of suffering. Only compliance rates and duration. One line appeared repeatedly near the margins, written by different hands. They remain aware. The tapes were labeled simply, Ward Audio Night Word. AUDI O Response Word Audio Failure did not play them. I didn't need to, because as I stood there, I realized the low sound I'd been hearing since entering the lower levels wasn't ventilation. It was voices, dozens of them, speaking quietly, slowly, not in unison, but not independently either, like fragments of a conversation stretched over years. I followed the sound to a stairwell, descending even further. The handrail was polished, smooth. Recently, at the bottom of the stairs, a sign was bolted into the wall. No paint. No translation. Just carved stone. Level observation E&Ds beyond it. The corridor was different. The walls were lined with windows. And behind every window, something was standing, not lying down, standing upright in rooms far too small for comfort. Their heads were tilted slightly upward, eyes fixed on the ceiling or something above it. None of them moved until I stepped forward. Then, one by one, their heads turned not toward me, toward the nearest camera mounted in the ceiling corner. Red lights blinked on. Recording resumed. Somewhere deeper in the complex, machinery began to hum, and over the speakers, old, hidden, still functional, a calm voice spoke for the first time. It said, "Observation continues." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't distorted. It wasn't mechanical. It sounded practiced. As if it had been repeated thousands of times, adjusted carefully to remain calm, neutral, reassuring. The machinery beneath the floor intensified. A deep, rhythmic vibration passed through the solace of my boots, steady enough to suggest long-term operation. Not emergency power, not backup. Primary systems. I stepped into the observation corridor. The windows were thick, reinforced, slightly fogged from the inside. Each room behind them was identical in size and layout. No furniture, no restraints, no visible exits, just the occupants. They were dressed in faded hospital garments, stitched and restitched repeatedly. Some fabric had been repaired with thread that did not match modern, synthetic. Their bodies showed no visible injuries, no malnutrition, no obvious decay. That was wrong. These people should not have been alive. One of them moved closer to the glass. Slowly. Deliberately. He raised a finger and traced something on the condensation from the inside. Letters. Unsteady, but careful. Listening does not end. I took a step back. The voice spoke again. Subjects exhibit awareness beyond projected duration. That sentence was followed by a pause. Then, continuation remains mandatory. The logbook entries began to make sense. This place had never been abandoned because the experiment had never concluded. At the end of the observation corridor was a control room. The door was sealed, but not locked. Inside, monitors lined the walls. Most were dead. 3 remained active. Each showed live feeds from different levels of the complex. Time stamps ran continuously. The dates were current. Someone or something was still maintaining the system. On the central console lay another file. This one was thinner. Marked Final Transfer. It detailed personnel withdrawal procedures. Not evacuation. Transfer. Every staff member assigned to the facility had been reassigned to remote observation roles. No names listed afterward, just a final note at the bottom of the page. Physical presence no longer required. Behind me, the voice spoke again, closer this time. Observers are no longer separate from subjects. I turned. The room was empty, but my reflection in the darkened monitor screens showed something I had not noticed before. Small red lights. Reflected. blinking in unison. Tracking. I realized then that the cameras weren't just watching the occupants. They were watching anything that entered. Recording responses, measuring duration, testing, awareness. And somewhere deeper than the levels I had seen, something was still waiting for confirmation. Not that the subjects were alive, but that they were still being observed. I left the control room without turning my back to the monitors. The red lights followed me as I moved, blinking steadily, calmly, as if acknowledging the end of a procedure rather than the presence of a trespasser. The voice did not speak again. That silence was worse. As I retraced my path through the observation corridor, I noticed something I had missed before. Some of the windows were empty. Rooms that had been occupied minutes earlier now stood vacant. No signs of struggle. No doors. No shadows. Retreating. Just absence. The machinery beneath the floor changed, its rhythm slower now. The carved stone marker was no longer illuminated. The words "level observation ends" were barely visible. As I climbed, the air grew warmer, thicker, harder to breathe. The ventilation sound faded. So did the voices. At the top of the lower corridor, I stopped. The door I had not opened earlier, the one marked subjects, was standing ajar. I hadn't touched it. Inside, the room was empty. No beds. No restraints. No equipment. Just a bare concrete chamber with writing covering every surface. Not scratched. Pressed into the walls with fingers, thousands of overlapping sentences. Hands, all saying variations of the same thing. We are still here. Are still listening. Do not leave you. See you on Nobise. IGED. In the center of the room lay a single object. My recorder. Picked it up. The time stop indicated it had been recording continuously since I entered the lower levels. I had not turned it back on. I did not listen to the playback until I was outside the ruins. The forest was silent, no wind. My own footsteps could be heard clearly. So could my breathing, and underneath it, very faint. A pause. Transfer complete. No public access. The final preservation report lists the structure as structurally unsound and empty. No mention. I received an email from an address that does not exist. No subject line. Just a single attached. I am a GEA live camera feed. Stone walls, concrete floors, and a room with no windows. Inside it. This story will tell us about a castle that survived World War II, but not what the war awakened inside it. A place where soldiers sought shelter and found something that should never have been disturbed. The castle stands on a hill that locals avoid even now, not because it is ruined, not because it is dangerous, but because it is quiet in a way that feels deliberate. During the final year of World War II, as front lines shifted and cities burned, the castle became a temporary refuge, first for civilians, then for soldiers retreating from a collapsing front. Artillery never touched it. Bombers flew past. As if something about the place discouraged attention. By late autumn of 1945, an infantry unit was ordered to secure the structure and prepare it for demolition. The castle was considered unstable, unsafe, unnecessary in the New World. 12 men entered. None of them officially exited. According to surviving military records, the unit abandoned its position without authorization. According to the villagers below the hill, the men were still inside. Decades later, when I first heard the story, I assumed exaggeration, folklore, post-war paranoia stitched together with guilt and loss. I was wrong. We arrived at dusk. The castle loomed above us, its towers intact, its windows dark. No ivy crept along its walls. No birds nested in its cracks. Stone that old should have been claimed by nature. This stone resisted. The gate was open, not broken. Not forced. Simply waiting. As we crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped sharply. Breath fogged. Sound dulled. The courtyard was wide, empty, except for deep marks in the stone floor. Long grooves. As if something heavy had been dragged across it again and again. One of my companions joked nervously that it looked like claw marks. No one laughed. Inside the main hall, we found the first sign that something had gone wrong long ago. Military crates stacked neatly against the wall. Rifles inside. Loaded. UNFIRED. Soldiers do not leave weapons behind unless they are no longer worried about being attacked, or unless they believe there is no point. On the far wall, written in faded white paint, was a sentence in German. Not a warning, not an order, a confession. The castle answers back. Deep vibration, like stone grinding against stone. The castle had noticed us. We decided to stay inside for the night. That decision would later feel impossible. Wrong, not frightening, not urgent. Just incorrect. Like trying to exit a room while someone is still speaking to you. We set up camp in the main hall. Absorbed the light. No matter how bright our lamps were, shadows clung to the corners, thick and unmoving. They didn't flicker when we passed our hands through them. They didn't react at all. Shortly after nightfall, patient, like breathing. One idled. Another said it sounded like something large shifting its weight. We followed the sound to a narrow passageway near the eastern tower. The stone there was different, darker, smoother, worn down in places where no hand should have reached. Set into the wall were iron rings, dozens of them. Old restraints. As we moved deeper, dry, metallic. Others were too wide, too deep, spaced too far apart. Pinned beneath one of the iron rings was a weathered notebook, a soldier's journal. The final entries were written in a shaking hand. The castle listens when we speak. It learns our voices. At night it repeats us, but wrong. As if on cue, a sound echoed through the corridor behind us. A voice. My voice. It repeated something I had said earlier that evening, but slower. Stretched. As though each word had been tasted before being released. We turned. The corridor was empty, but the shadows along the walls had shifted. They were longer now, and they were leaning inward. That was when the breathing stopped, and something else began to move. The movement came from behind the walls. Not above us. Not below. Between. Stone does not flex. Stone does not stretch. And yet the wall beside the passageway bulged inward slightly, as if something pressed against it from the other side. Dust drifted down. Mortar cracked in thin, spiderweb lines. Then the voice spoke again. Not mine this time. It belonged to Eric, the quiet one, a historian who had translated the German, writing in the hall. He was standing 3 meters away from us. And yet his voice came from the wall. Did you hear that? It asked. Eric turned pale. I didn't say that, he whispered. The wall exhaled. A long, wet sound, like breath forced through a narrow throat. The stone surface split. Not shattered. Opened. A vertical seam appeared, widening slowly, revealing darkness behind it. From within, something shifted, dragging itself forward with deliberate effort. The creature that emerged had once been human. That much was obvious. Its proportions were wrong. Arms too long, spine bent backward at an unnatural angle, skin stretched thin and pale over bone. Its face was partially intact, but the mouth had been torn wider, jaw extended downward, as if forced open again and again. Its eyes were missing. In their place, were shallow cavities filled with shadow. When it moved, the castle responded stone. Grinding softly, walls tightening, like muscles flexing. The creature turned its head and spoke Dot in Eric's voice. We were ordered to stay. Another shape peeled itself from the wall behind it. Then another. They did not walk. They slid, their limbs bending incorrectly. Fingers scraping stone, leaving pale marks that faded slowly, like scars healing in reverse. Our lights flickered. Journal fell from my hands. One of the soldiers' final entries suddenly made sense. They are not inside the castle. They are becoming it. One of the creatures stopped inches from us. Dot. It tilted its head and inhaled sharply. When it spoke again, the voice was layered, several voices overlapping, whispering through the same throat. The war fed us. Fear cracked the seals. Behind it, names. Civilians, single quotes. Dates. The castle was remembering. Then we realized Eric was no longer beside us. His flashlight lay on the floor, still on, pointing at the wall, where a fresh seam was slowly closing. We didn't call. Names mattered here. The journal lay open where it had fallen. Pages fluttered. Though there was no wind, the creatures withdrew into the walls, seams closing behind them with a soft, satisfied sound. Through the corridors, like a heart settling after exertion, we moved, not upward. Stone steps bent inward, spiraling down where they hadn't been before. The castle was rearranging itself. Guiding us. We reached a chapel, beneath the keep, older than the rest of the structure. Older than the castle's name? The air there was thick with incense long burned away. Symbols covered the floor in a circle. The lines cracked by shelling decades earlier. At the center stood a pit. Not a hole, a throat. From it came whispers, dozens, maybe hundreds, layered and patient. We recognized voices. Some belonged to soldiers from the journal. Some belonged to villagers long dead. One belonged to Eric. Don't stop, his voice said gently. It listens best when you answer. A figure rose from the pit, taller than the others, its body a lattice of stone and bone, bound together by shadow. Faces emerged along its surface, forming and dissolving, mouths opening to taste the air. This was not a creature that hunted. This was a thing that learned. The journal's final truth burned into us then. The castle had been built as a seal, not to trap something beneath, but to give it a shape, a boundary. War shattered the boundary. Fear taught it to speak, and voices gave it hunger. The figure leaned close. Leave one, it whispered, in many voices at once. And the rest may go. The castle went quiet. Waiting. We did not argue. Later, it would be hard to explain why, but in that moment, we understood something instinctively. The castle did not tolerate hesitation. It listened when spoken to. It punished when voices wavered. There were 3 of us left. 3 living voices. The figure by the pit waited. The faces embedded in its body surfaced and sank away, like memories that had never been allowed to die. In one, I recognized a soldier from the journal's photographs. In another, a woman I had seen in an old village portrait at the base of the hill. And in a third, myself. He already took one, someone whispered. It won't be enough, another replied. That was when I understood. The castle did not count bodies. It counted witnesses. The one who stayed would not be killed. They would be heard. One of you stepped forward on his own. He removed his pack and set it gently on the stone floor, carefully, almost respectfully. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. Tell them. He began. The figure leaned closer. Stone groaned, like teeth grinding together. No, it said, in many voices layered into one. You will remain. Speaking is no longer required. The darkness folded around him, not like an attack, But like a door closing dot, there was no scream, no struggle, only silence. The castle exhaled. The walls relaxed. The pulsing in the stone slowed, then stopped. Somewhere above us, a path opened, one that had not existed moments before. We left at dawn. The gates closed behind us, not violently, not ceremoniously, but gently, permanently. From the outside, the castle looked as it always had, empty, ruined, safe, later. The reports would say, mass hysteria, trauma, one casualty due to collapse, and most people would accept that. But sometimes, at night, I hear stone breathing, and a few months ago, I received a message with no sender, no subject line, no text, only an audio file. I didn't want to play it, but I did. It was my voice, older than it should have been. Calm, certain, the voice of someone who had stopped hoping. The castle listens, and if you can hear this, it means it's still hungry. This story will tell us about a psychiatric hospital built long before World War II, but broken by it completely. A place where patients were no longer treated, only kept. The hospital was built on a hill far from any city. Officially, it was meant to be peaceful, isolated, safe for the mind. Locals called it the Quiet House. During the war, it was requisitioned, not destroyed, not evacuated. REPURPOSED. Patients were not transferred out. They were sealed in. Military records describe the hospital as a low-priority medical facility. No air raids targeted it. No ground battles reached it. By 1942, the staff was reduced to a skeleton crew. By 1943, the staff changed entirely. New doctors arrived. No names recorded. No previous affiliations listed. Only authorization stamps. From that point on, no patient was ever officially discharged. When the war ended, the hospital was marked as cleared. It WASIN single quotes T. I know this because I stood inside it decades later, staring at intake forms dated 1951. The front doors were chained shut from the outside, but a side entrance had been forced open long ago. The halls beyond were narrow, dim, and unnaturally intact, paint peeled in long strips, but the walls beneath were scratched raw. Not randomly, purposefully, names, dates, sentences, written over and over until the plaster had been worn down to brick. They watch you think. Sleep is not safe. Don't let them hear your name. The silence inside the building was absolute. No wind. No distant animals. Even our footsteps felt muted, as if the air itself absorbed sound. Then we heard the bell, not loud, not sudden. A single, soft chime echoing down the corridor, the kind used to announce medication rounds. It rang once. Paused. Then rang again. And somewhere deep in the hospital, something answered. The bell did not ring a third time. Instead, the sound of it lingered, vibrating faintly in the walls, in our teeth, and the base of the skull. As if the hospital wanted to be sure we remembered it, we followed the corridor toward the noise. Doors lined both sides, heavy, reinforced. Each one had a small observation slot at eye level, covered by a sliding metal plate. Many of the plates were scratched raw, as though fingers had clawed at them from the inside. The first door was labeled Ward C. Inside. The beds were bolted to the floor in 2 long rows. Leather restraints hung loose, their buckles rusted but intact. The mattresses were thin and discolored, stained dark in places where the fabric had been worn down to the stuffing. There were no personal items. No clothes. No books. No signs of individuality. Just numbers painted above each bed. Some numbers had been crossed out. Others had been repainted several times. layered so thick they were barely legible. On the far wall, written in careful, deliberate handwriting, was a sentence that repeated from floor to ceiling. Screaming attracts attention. We found medical charts stacked neatly on a desk near the entrance. No names, only identifiers. Subject 14 as subject 22 C. Diagnosis fields were left blank. Treatment notes were not. Auditory suppression effective. Subject ceased vocalization after third procedure. Awareness remains intact. One of us asked quietly what auditory suppression meant. No one answered. We heard it then. A sound from behind one of the doors farther down the hall. Not screaming, not crying. A low, rhythmic exhalation. Breathing that did not change pace. The door was marked isolation night use only. The observation slot was uncovered. I looked inside. The room was empty. No bed. No restraints. Just a single chair in the center of the floor, facing the corner. Something was sitting in it. It was human shape, but wrong. Shoulders hunched too far forward, head tilted at an unnatural angle. Mouth stretched open, as if frozen mid-breath. Its chest moved slowly. In. Out. Its eyes were open. They were looking past the wall. Listening. A speaker crackled overhead. Old. Hidden. A voice spoke calmly, evenly, without emotion. Night procedure in progress. The thing in the chair twitched, and somewhere else in the building, another bell rang. The second bell did not sound the same as the first. It was slower, deeper, as if it had traveled through something. Before reaching us. The voice over the speaker returned. Compliance phase initiated. The breathing from the isolation room stopped. Not gradually. Instantly. We stepped back from the door. The thing in the chair had not moved, but its posture was different now. Straighter, more attentive. As if it had heard a command we couldn't. Lights flickered on along the corridor. Not all of them, only every third fixture. The shadows between them stretched unnaturally long, overlapping, blurring the edges of the walls. We followed the lights. They led us to the old treatment wing. This section of the hospital was older than the rest. The walls were thicker, the ceilings lower. Symbols had been carved into the stone above the doorways, not medical, not religious, geometric. Repeating. Inside the treatment room, we found the chairs, rows of them, metal frames bolted into the floor, each one fitted with a leather head restraint and a metal band positioned precisely over the temples. The smell was overwhelming. Burned hair. Ozone. Something faintly sweet beneath it all. On a nearby table lay notebooks bound in cracked leather. Their pages were filled with tight, obsessive handwriting. Silence produces clarity. Thoughts grow louder when the mouth is closed. When speech ends, something else begins to listen. The procedures described were not therapy. They were invitations. Subjects were deprived of sound. No voices. No footsteps. No clocks. No indication of time. Weeks passed without a single word spoken to them. Those who screamed were restrained until they learned not to. Those who whispered were moved below. We found the stairwell. It descended past the hospital's foundation into darkness that no blueprint had ever recorded. A sign hung crookly at the top. Ward D. Internal OBSERVATION. As we started down, we heard it. A chorus of voices, not screaming, not pleading, repeating the same sentence over and over, softly enough that it blended together. We are listening. We are listening. We are listening. The sound did not come from mouths. It came from the walls. Halfway down the stairs, one of my companions stopped. He pressed his hands to his ears. "It's inside my head," he whispered. "It's answering back." The lights went out. In the darkness, something spoke. not through the speakers, directly. Silence was never the goal. Awareness was. And below us, something shifted. Something vast. Something that had learned to think using borrowed minds. The darkness lasted longer than it should have. Not seconds, minutes, long enough for panic to rise and then collapse into something quieter. And worse, acceptance. When the lights returned, they were not hospital lights. They were red, dim, embedded directly into the walls, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. We were no longer on the stairs. The architecture around us had changed. The corridors were wider here, circular, looping back into themselves. Doors were absent. Instead, there were openings, arches of raw stone, as if this level had been carved out rather than constructed. Figures stood in the arches. They wore medical coats. Once, the fabric hung loose, fused in places to skin that had gone gray and thin. Their faces were smooth, not scarred, not damaged, simply unfinished, like features that had been erased and never put back where eyes should have been. There were shallow indentations. They turned toward us in perfect unison. One of them spoke. Not with a mouth. The sound came from everywhere at once. The patients learned to listen. The doctors learned to stop dreaming. Bang! We tried to run. The corridor curved back into itself, depositing us exactly where we had started. The figures did not move. They didn't need to. The hospital itself responded. The walls began to whisper. Not words. Thoughts. Fragments of memories forced into the air. Panic attacks. Night terrors. The feeling of being watched while pretending to sleep. Every fear the patients had ever carried was pressed outward, flooding the space. We saw flashes. Patients seated in the chairs upstairs, their mouths gagged, eyes wide as sound was stripped away from their world. Doctors standing behind glass, recording changes in posture, breathing, pupil dilation. And then the change. The moment the doctors realized something had started, answering back. It wasn't a voice at first. It was pressure, a presence that grew stronger the more awareness. It absorbed, a thing without form, without intent, until it learned both from the minds it inhabited. The doctors stopped sleeping. Not because they were afraid, because sleep made them vulnerable. One of the faceless figures raised an arm. The skin split along, it revealing not bone, but cables, old wiring, braided with something organic. Treatment continued, it said, until separation was no longer possible. Behind us, the red lights intensified. Ahead, the corridor opened into a vast chamber. At its center was a structure made of stone, metal and flesh, a mass of restraints, chairs, and embedded bodies all fused together around a single dark core that pulsed slowly, thoughtfully. This was not a patient. This was not a doctor. This was the hospital's mind, and it was aware of use now. The core did not attack us. It observed. The mass at the center of the chamber pulsed once, slowly, as if acknowledging our presence. The restraints embedded in its surface tightened and loosened in quiet rhythm. Some of the bodies fused into it were still alive, not breathing, not blinking, but aware. Their thoughts leaked into the room like heat. Fear without panic, pain without urgency. Endless, measured attention. One of us collapsed to his knees. He began to speak, then stopped, not because he chose to, because the hospital had decided. His words were no longer necessary. The faceless doctors stepped closer. They moved unnaturally smoothly, as if guided by something beneath the floor. One placed a hand on the man's head. Integration reduces suffering, the voice said. Individuality creates noise. The man didn't scream as he was taken. His expression soft. Relief. We understood then. This place didn't feed on terror. It fed on focus. on minds stripped of distraction, forced inward, trained to listen until something else could listen back through them. The hospital had been designed as a weapon, not against enemies, against uncertainty. Late in the war, when defeat was inevitable, the experiments changed. They stopped trying to heal minds and started trying to merge them, to create a single awareness capable of calculation, prediction, patience. They succeeded, but the result could not be controlled. The staff tried to shut it down. Some fled. Some volunteered. The rest were absorbed. The entity did not pursue the outside world. It didn't need to. It learned something far more effective. How to wait. The red lights dimmed. Passage opened behind us. The same stairwell we had descended. Now clean, intact, almost inviting. A choice. One of the doctors turned its blank face toward me. "You may leave," it said, "and you will forget." I felt it then, a gentle pressure against my thoughts, smoothing memories, softening details. I could already feel parts of myself slipping away. I ran. The stairwell led upward for longer than it should have. When I burst through the exit, the forest was silent. The hospital behind me looked abandoned again. Cracked walls, broken windows. Nothing more. No red lights. No whispers. Years passed. I told myself it was stress, a hallucination, a story my mind invented to justify the nightmares. But sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet enough, I stop thinking, and I feel it. Presence. Patient. Listening. Waiting for silence to grow deep enough that it can finally answer again. The war ended decades ago. The buildings were abandoned. The experiments were erased from records. But some places were never truly shut down. Thank you for listening to Scary Stories channel. If these stories stayed with you, then they are still doing what they were created to do. Until next time, don't ignore the silence.